"Your kid's a liar," the assistant principal said, leaning back in his chair like he'd already won. "And honestly, he's lucky we're not pressing charges for disrupting team practice. My advice, keep him home, keep him quiet, and let this go." He said it the way men say things when they're used to nobody pushing back. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I picked up my jacket and left without a word. "My name is Aaron Decker. I'm 34 years old. I run a small private forensic accounting firm out of Charlotte, North Carolina. My whole career has been built on one thing: finding what people try to hide. Numbers don't lie, paper trails don't disappear, and people who think they've covered their tracks almost always leave something behind." 3 days before that meeting, my son came home from school with his shirt torn at the collar and a look on his face I'd never seen before. Not crying, not angry, just empty, like something had been switched off behind his eyes. He was 15. He dropped his bag by the door, walked past me without a word, went upstairs, and didn't come down for dinner. I didn't push that night. I knew that look. I'd seen it on grown men, after things they couldn't talk about yet, so I left a plate outside his door and sat downstairs and waited. Around midnight he came down, sat across from me at the kitchen table, and he put his phone face up between us without saying anything. There was a video. It had been sent to him privately from an account I didn't recognize. In it, 4 boys in lacrosse jerseys were in what looked like a locker room hallway. My son was against the wall, arms up, saying something I couldn't hear over the laughing. One of them grabbed his bag and dumped it. Another shoved him into the lockers hard enough that he stumbled. They filmed all of it, and at the end, one of them looked directly into the camera and said, "Clear as anything. Tell your dad to stay out of parent meetings, or we'll make sure you never play another game at Harwick Prep. This is just a warm-up." Then the clip cut to black. My son looked at me and said, "I didn't want you to see that." I didn't say anything right away. I picked up the phone. I watched it again. I set it back down carefully. "Did you tell anyone at school?" I asked. "Coach Purcell saw part of it happen," he said. "He told me to walk it off. Said the team was under a lot of pressure before regionals." I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. "Go to sleep." He looked at me like he expected something else. "That's it?" "That's it for tonight," I said. "I'm not going to do anything tonight that I'll have to undo tomorrow." He went upstairs. I sat at that table until 3 a.m. Not out of anger, out of focus. Because there's a difference between reacting and responding. And I'd learned it the hard way years ago. The next morning, I called the school. That's when I got the assistant principal, and that's when I heard the words I already expected. The boys were athletes. Stars. The kind of kids whose names were on the donor building plaque by the gymnasium. The kind of kids who got walked off the field gently, while other kids got walked out the door permanently. I thanked him for his time, hung up, and started working. The first thing I did was the same thing I always do when a client comes to me with a problem. I mapped the structure. Who had power here? Who protected whom? Who had something to lose? Harwick Prep was a private school. Tuition around $32,000 a year. The lacrosse program had produced 2 Division I recruits in the last 3 years. The head coach, a man named Purcell, had been there 11 years. The booster club was chaired by the father of the kid, who'd spoken directly into the camera at the end of that video. A real estate developer named Vic Stanhope, the assistant principal, the man who'd told me to let it go, had been hired 2 years ago, 6 months after Stanhope joined the board. It took me about 4 hours to sketch that out. None of it was hidden. It was all public record, school newsletters, board minutes, a local business journal profile on Stanhope. People in positions of influence almost never bother hiding the structure. They don't think anyone's going to look. I looked. Then I called 2 people I trusted. The first was a former colleague who now did digital forensics for a law firm in Raleigh. The second was a woman I'd worked with a decade ago who specialized in institutional compliance. Specifically, private schools and their obligations under state harassment law. I didn't tell either of them what I was planning. I just asked 2 very specific questions, and by the end of those calls, I understood something clearly. What had happened to my son wasn't just a bullying incident. based on prior complaints I didn't know existed yet. It was potentially a pattern. And if it was a pattern, the school's silence wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. That made it something else entirely. I didn't tell my son any of this. He was already nervous enough. He'd gone back to school the next day because I'd asked him to. And he'd come home quiet but okay. And in the evenings we watched baseball and talked about normal things. And I let him believe for a while that I hadn't started pulling threads yet. But I had. My former colleague pulled the video's metadata within 48 hours. The original file had been recorded on a specific device, with a timestamp that contradicted the school's own security log, which claimed the hallway cameras in the locker wing had been offline for maintenance. During that window, they weren't offline when the video was recorded. They were selectively not reviewed. That was the first crack. The second came from my compliance contact. She'd pulled Harwick Prep's accreditation file, standard public document, and cross-referenced it with state reporting requirements for harassment incidents. Private schools in North Carolina, with more than 200 students, are required to log and report all substantiated bullying or harassment complaints to the State Education Board annually. The last 3 years of Harwick's reports showed a grand total of 2 incidents logged. For a school of 340 students, in 3 years, 2 incidents, she said. Either this is the most polite private school in the state, or someone's been cleaning the file, I said. I know which one it is. I still didn't contact a lawyer, not yet. In my work, I've learned that the moment you file, the other side gets defensive and information dries up. I needed people to still think I was the grieving, powerless parent who'd been told to go home and be quiet. I needed them comfortable. I needed them still talking. So I did something uncomfortable but necessary. I called the mother of one of the other boys in the video. Not to confront her, just to talk, parent to parent, about how our kids were doing. Friendly, concerned. She was the kind of person who talks when she's nervous, and within 10 minutes she'd told me more than she meant to. She mentioned her son had been coached on what to say if anyone asked about an incident in the fall. She mentioned the word incident, like it was a thing that had already been named, already categorized, already managed somewhere above her pay grade. I thanked her. I hung up. I wrote down everything she'd said, word for word, and I dated it and saved it. There had been another kid before my son. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew he existed. It took me 5 more days to find him. He'd transferred out of Harwick Prep the previous spring. Quietly, mid-semester, after something happened during a away game bus ride that his family had been asked to handle privately. His father had signed a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for a partial tuition refund. The family had moved to a different part of the county. Their son was now enrolled in a public school. I didn't approach them. Not yet. I wasn't going to pull another family into something without being sure I could protect them too. But I documented everything I had. And then I waited. I waited because I knew something was coming. When people think a threat has gone quiet, they get comfortable. And when they get comfortable, they make mistakes. It's not cynicism, it's pattern recognition. I've built a career on it. 9 days after the video was sent to my son, a second message arrived. This one came through a fake account to my son's school email. An address that was technically school property, which meant whoever sent it hadn't thought that part through. The message said, "Hope you're enjoying sitting out. Stay benched or things get worse. We've done it before. We've done it before." That sentence did a lot of work. I forwarded the email to my digital forensics contact immediately. He traced the account's registration through a shared IP cluster, back to a home network, registered to a Harwick Prep booster. Not a student, an adult, someone who was either helping or had let a student use their connection without thinking about it. Either way, that email was now evidence of coordinated harassment across school-provided digital infrastructure. It changed the legal category of what we were dealing with. I packaged everything I had into a single document, the original video with metadata, the security log discrepancy, the compliance filing gaps from 3 years of state reports, the phone conversation notes from the other parent, the second message with IP trace, A 3-page summary of the prior student transfer, sourced only from what was already on the public record. Then I made 3 copies. One went to a Charlotte area journalist who covered education policy. She'd done a piece 2 years ago on accreditation irregularities at a charter school chain, and I'd been a quiet background source for her then. She owed me a conversation. One went to my attorney, who I called for the first time that morning, and one I held back. For the right moment, I still didn't send anything. I wanted one more thing first. My compliance contact had a former colleague on staff at the state's Private School Accreditation Commission. Not to file anything, just to ask, off the record, whether a school could remain in good standing if its harassment reporting was found to be systematically falsified. The answer came back within a day. No, a finding like that would trigger a mandatory compliance review, which would suspend the school's accreditation status pending resolution. And suspension meant every family currently enrolled had to be notified, which meant it became public, very public. Now I had leverage, real leverage. The kind that doesn't evaporate in a mediation room. I called the school's board chair, not Stanhope. The actual chair. A woman who'd been in the role for 6 years, and whose name appeared on every official communication as the responsible party for governance. I asked for a meeting. I said I had documentation I wanted to share before I decided how to proceed. She called back within 2 hours. We met 2 days later. I came alone. I brought a folder. I placed it on the table in front of her and let her look through it in silence for a few minutes. I watched her face change as she turned the pages. Then I said, "I'm not interested in money. I'm not here to threaten you personally. I'm here because what's in that folder describes a school that has systematically protected a group of students at the expense of others for at least 3 years. And I believe you didn't know the full picture. Now you do. What happens next is your decision. But will also be on record as your decision." She looked up at me. "What do you want?" I said, "I want the boys in that video removed from the lacrosse team and placed in an alternative program, pending a full independent review. I want Coach Purcell placed on administrative leave during that review. I want a third party brought in to audit every harassment report filed in the last 5 years. And I want that auditor's findings made available to the State Accreditation Board before the end of the semester." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And if we do all of that," I said, "then you'll have demonstrated that this board is capable of correcting itself. That matters, both legally and in terms of your standing with families. The alternative is that I submit this package tomorrow morning, and you find out the same things I just told you through a state investigation and a news story. That process takes longer, costs more, and you have less control over it." She closed the folder. "I'll need to speak with legal counsel." "Of course," I said. "I'd expect that. I'll hold off on any submissions for 5 business days. After that, I move forward regardless of where the conversation is." I shook her hand. I picked up my folder. I left. On the drive home, I called my son and asked if he wanted to get dinner somewhere, his choice. He picked a barbecue place we'd been going to since he was 8. We sat in a booth and ordered too much food, and he talked about a history project he was working on, and I listened and didn't think about the folder, or the board chair, or the 5-day clock. That night, I finally slept. 3 days later, my attorney received a formal response from the school's legal counsel. They were proposing an expedited internal review, requesting a 30-day window to complete it, and acknowledging in writing, for the first time, that the incidents described warranted serious examination. They were not admitting liability, but they were no longer pretending nothing had happened. My attorney told me the acknowledgement language was significant. I told her I knew. On day 4 of my 5-day window, 2 of the 4 boys were quietly removed from the lacrosse roster. The school sent a letter home to their families, describing it as a voluntary pause, pending a routine review. Coach Purcell was placed on paid administrative leave. The school's communications framed it as unrelated to any specific incident. Day 5, my attorney submitted our formal demands in writing, and I submitted the package to the journalist, with a note that she could use it however, and whenever she determined was appropriate. but that there were developments she should know about before publication. She published 6 days later. The piece ran in a regional education outlet, with a readership of about 80,000. Within 24 hours, it had been picked up by 2 larger outlets. Within 48 hours, 3 current Harwick families had publicly shared it on the school's parent forum. 2 alumni called for a formal board review in the comments section. Stanhope, the booster chair, resigned from the board the following Monday. He didn't issue a statement. His name just disappeared from the school's website. The independent auditor, a firm the board hired, under pressure from the Accreditation Commission, completed a preliminary review and found 11 harassment-related complaints over 4 years that had either been logged improperly, misfiled, or not logged at all. 11. The family of the boy who'd transferred out and signed the NDA was contacted as part of that review. Their agreement was found to be coercive under state contract law. It was voided. They were offered a full tuition reimbursement and a formal written apology from the board. The compliance review is still ongoing. Coach Purcell did not return after administrative leave. 3 of the 4 boys involved in the video are currently enrolled in a structured, off-campus alternative program as part of their agreement with the board. The 4th, Stanhope's son, transferred to a different school in the district. I don't know what his family told him. I don't really care. My son played his first game back 2 weeks. After all of this started moving, he scored twice. I sat in the bleachers in the cold like a normal parent and drank terrible concession stand coffee and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, which was ordinary. After the game, walking back to the car, he said, "Dad, did you actually just do all of that through paperwork?" I laughed. Actually laughed. Mostly, I said. He thought about that for a second, then he said, "That's kind of terrifying." I unlocked the car. "Yeah," I said, "it's supposed to be." We drove home. The city lights reflected off the wet road. The radio played something neither of us changed. And I thought about what one of my first mentors told me when I was starting out, an old CPA who'd spent 30 years untangling financial fraud and had seen every kind of cover-up imaginable. He used to say, "The cover-up is always worse than the thing. Always. Because the cover-up is a choice." 11 complaints. 4 years. 1 family bought off. A janitor's report buried. A security log selectively ignored. Children told to walk it off by a man whose salary was protected by the same system failing them. None of that happened because people were careless. It happened because people made choices, one at a time, and assumed no one was watching closely enough to connect them. I connected them. That's all I did. And it turned out that was enough.